The best way to describe the Type 58 is that it's a Chinese T-3485. In the 1950s, the Chinese and the Soviets got along incredibly well, and this sparked the Soviets to send them around about 2,000 T-3485s. 400 of them were passed on to the North Koreans, which were used in the Korean War, and they actually did pretty well against the Americans, at least at the start of the war, because the Americans were armed with M24 Chaffies. By the time that the M46 and of course the Centurion turned around though, let's just say the Chinese T-3485s got a bit of a spanking. And by the point of 1954, there was a survey done by the Operations Research Office report, or the office I should say. The report itself stated that 119 tanks versus tank engagements, 38 US tanks were knocked out by the T-34. So later, record shows less encounters of the type. Most North Korean T-34s have been then captured or destroyed, and the Chinese T-34s were employed piecemeal in support of the infantry. So as you can see, 38 US tanks were knocked out to around about 400, maybe 500 of the T-3485s. Not great numbers if you're on the North Korean side. So what is the difference between this machine, the Type 58, and the T-3485 that we have in game? So it was a simple and crude model relative to copy without extensive labor skills. So they're talking about the T-3485 here, which is why it was perfect for mass production for another nation. For this reason, it was seen perfect with Soviet engineers as consultants. The first Chinese domestic large-scale production of a sizable tank was the Type 58, which is at least interesting in of itself. It's the first proper massive, production that they created for themselves. So in the early 50s, this is when all of this happened. The Type 58 was basically similar in all directions to the Soviet model, without any real alterations. They came with two models of road wheels and supplies from the Soviets, which then just stopped the production and started some limited upgrades to it. The Type 58 was from a clone. It then began to differ with some alterations along two series of upgrades. So the first saw the adoption of the next Type 59 MBT sights and redesigned cupola, and the Type 58I, or the Type 58-1, depending on how you want to see it, was fitted with a dome-type commander's hatches and a HMG mount, while the Type 58-2 was given an additional cupola, also fitted with a HMG mount. So I'm confident in saying that this is one of those upgraded models. Now, to me, it looks slightly different to the to the T-3485 that we have in game. There is definitely something different about it, whether it is the gun, whether it's the shape of the turret, there's definitely something different there. But as you can see, the main difference, which is startling to look at, is the dishka on top. And it may not be a dishka, it just looks and sounds and fires like a dishka. And for that reason I think this is one of those upgraded models, either the 58-1 or the 58-2. Now, it only says it's the Type 58, so we'll have to have a gander, but my guess is the Type 58-2 because of how the cupolas are. There was also a Type 58 2M made, and that basically had optical sights. It had a lot of improvements to try and keep it up to date with modern times, but obviously by the time of even the 50s, the chassis itself of the T-3485 was definitely not the best, especially when you compare it to the M46s, the Centurion, everybody rolling out some hell of good vehicles moving about the place. Something that is interesting though is we have another vehicle on our side of the server which kind of takes a little bit from the Type 58, and this would be the Type 65. The Type 65 being the gift vehicle that has the two 37mm on it, which is the only decent Russian AA that you have to take at rank 4. So yeah, at least we have a little bit of representation of it, but if this was ever added to the game, it would strictly be a Chinese addition. This would never, in my opinion, come to the Soviet tree, because in the end of the day, it's just an 85 with a dishka on top of it. But let's get on to the next vehicle. The Type 59 is considered one of China's first MBTs, and it came around in the time of 1958. Because of the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance and Mutual Assistance, this basically meant that China was able to get their hands on such machines as the T-54A. They were able to set up a first production facility in 1956 in the north of China, which was designed to produce the T-54A. From creating the T-54A, the Chinese used this as a basis to be able to create their own Type 59. And this machine was pretty much a slightly worse T-54, but it depends on which side of the coin you sit on. So it had a 520 horsepower diesel in it. It was able to go at 50 kilometers an hour at around about a max operational range of about 450 to 600 kilometers. It weighed 36 tons or 40 short tons, and its main armament was a 100mm Model 58. It also had two 7.62s on it, and the Type 54AA had a 12.7mm on top of it. So the armor itself, if you look at the upper glacis, you're going at 190mm, so a tough nut to crack, especially if this thing sat around 7.7. You're going to need to whap out the heat FS. The turret front is 203mm, and the other areas, such as the lower glacis, sides, and back, range from 20 to 100mm. So it was about 9,500 meters of 500 of these made. And it was also, there's a very famous picture that I'll include here, where it was a man sat in front of some Chinese vehicles. Well, those Chinese vehicles were Type 59s. Not the one that I'm showing here, but one of the later versions, but it's definitely something that is going to sit in history for a very long time, for reasons not because of the Type 59, but because of the man sat in front of it. The Type 59 also participated in some conflicts. There was a Sino-Soviet border conflict in 1969, but its only apparent active engagement was in the Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979. There was about 300 tanks of the PLA participated in the offensive against the mountainous North Vietnam with heavy losses on some occurrences, and however, most of the 48 tanks lost to enemy action were mostly down to RPGs, were actually light Type 62s. About 5,000 of the upgraded Type 59s are currently in service with the PLA, supplemented by other models. They still constitute the bulk of the armored force of the PLA, so that is something to realize, but obviously not the one we're looking at here, later models of it. Now, since this is a copy of the T-54A, we only have the standard 3 versions of the T-54 in game, and they're done by year instead of version, so you don't have an A, B, and C, you have a 47, 51, and 53, I believe. I might be slightly wrong on those. But anyway, being as we already have the T-54 in game, adding this to the Soviet tree doesn't really make a lot of sense, and because of the BRs of the T-54s sat around 7.7, that means that it won't be a gift vehicle either, because it's way too high for one of them. One of the highest gift vehicles we've seen is the E100, but that to me was a tournament vehicle. It's much better known for me, if we just talk about raw gift vehicles, as the ME262, A2A, or A1A, I can't remember which one, basically the one with the 230s on it and the ability to carry bombs. That sits at 6.7. So, putting this in game as a gift would be, well, it would be a little bit high compared to other stuff we could have. I think it would be much better if this was left until we actually get a proper Chinese tech tree and people can use it from there. BR-wise, I'd say this thing is going to be about 7370. It is worse than the T-54 in armor, but its engine does keep up, and so does its gun. If you want to know the ammunition this thing is rocking on this version, we are looking at the BR-412B APHE-BC, the Type 1959 APDS, the Sabre round, the BR-412D APC-BC, and of course the Type 1973 Heat FS. So if this thing is able to not get its Heat FS because it was obviously about 15 years after it actually came out, my guess would be you'd sit at around 7.0. On par with something like a T-44-100, maybe 7.3, but with Heat FS you could stock it up to 7.7 and it would be completely fine. It also has a stabilizer, which is something that has to be recognized. It also has a crew of 4, so manual loaded, no auto loader here. You have a commander, driver, loader, gunner, and yeah, it's a pretty nice little vehicle, but if you played the T-54, you pretty much played this, even just a slightly better version. The Type 59D was an effort by the Chinese to modernize the Type 59 in the 1990s. It was known internally as the WZ-120C, and it was a way to upgrade a large part of their arms that they had in the form of tanks. Part of these, the main enhancements that came to these machines, was ERA protection against heat and HE. It also had a new 105mm Type 8320 tank gun. It had a passive night vision on it and also upgraded FCS. The propulsion actually relies on the 580 horsepower engine, the 12150L7, and the gun could fire APF SDS and depleted uranium rounds, which were efficient up to about 2 miles against an equivalent of 600mm of armor. So pretty much the rounds which a lot of people want for the Abrams right now. Also, ATGMs are apparently supposed to be carried in this machine. A lot of guns by this point in the 80s and 90s were designed to fire ATGMs out of them. And also there is an export version, the Type 59P was created. Sudan also geared up a local production under license as the Al Zubair 2. So this is the 1990s version of the Type 59. Now, we are getting some 1990s vehicles, such as the Type 90, the Challenger, you could also say is a 1990s vehicle, since it was used then primarily, but I don't think this vehicle really stands up to them. The armor wasn't improved apart from the ERA added. The gun itself was improved to use some very useful shells. If we actually look at the list from the Live War Thunder post, it in game right now, in this test, it uses the Type 83 APF SDS, which goes through everything that I've come across, with a few slight ones where it struggles with, such as the Challenger turret. But basically the DM23 APF SDS is the Type 83 round, to look at it like that. The creator also says that they were unable to use the Type 83 heat and the Type 83 hash that this thing could use, and is looking for help. So if you can help the lad, go ahead. But basically this thing could fire heat hash and APF SDS and maybe ATGMs on top of it. For me, it looks like a machine that would work in the 8.3, 8.7 bracket, but no higher, because it's not that fast. Its gun isn't amazingly good, even though it does have access to APF SDS. It does have a stabilizer. The ERA is okay, but the main thing is the armor is just generally not good enough, and the speed, obviously no dual drive. None of these vehicles have a dual drive, and the reverse is abysmal, as it is a Soviet/Chinese vehicle. But overall, a very interesting machine that we may see at the top of a Chinese tech tree. Once again, I don't think this should be put in a Russian tech tree. This is a Chinese vehicle. Hopefully we eventually see a Chinese tech tree. Next time we'll have a look at the last 3 Chinese vehicles.